Hello everyone, welcome back. Last we left off in part 1, we had just finished creating this pattern here. All that's sort of left to do is to create the transform 2D and rotate it 180 degrees so that we get this second section here, which is the lower half of the pattern. I did forget to mention in the last part that I have always got these patterns plugged into a tile sampler of their own, and these are just sort of separated off into their own sections. Now this is just to get rid of any randomness and anything that might sort of mess us up a little bit and make us make any strange changes. And then when we're all finished doing here, we can start actually tiling it exactly the way we want to tile it in the final product. But let's just have a look at what we got here, because I don't think I went over these in the last part. So I've got the 3 tile samplers. This one's on a X amount of 3 and a Y amount of 2. And then I've put it on pattern input, and make sure you put the pattern input distribution onto the distribution map. Next we want to come all the way down and we'll see a sort of mask map threshold, because we're going to be using a distribution map and a masking map. So we just want to push this all the way to 1, and that will get rid of all of these. So if we go up here, we'll sort of see all the masks that I've created, and these are all the masks for all 3 of them. And then we'll go back to the rest of the tile samplers and I'll quickly go over those so you have them in your scene. So this one's just a gradient linear. They're all gradient linears, and except this one's a gradient linear 2. It just made things a little bit easier. So we just push this gradient linear into a gradient map, and then I'm just sort of pushing the grey up a little bit. And this is just to give me a white value here, and then just sort of separate these 2 things. Now this is for the distribution map for that tile sampler I just went over. So if you want to plug that into the distribution map, then that should put this pattern at the top and this one at the bottom. This one here is what we're using to create masks, so, and the same with this one. So if we just go another gradient linear here, and then you go push a gradient map over here, and then just push the black values all the way and crunch them a little bit to the right, and then do the same to the left. And this one's just the same thing, except it's doing one on each side. So then you just plug those masks into their respected positions. So the one that's on the right goes into this one. You can put it on any. I just put the one on the right on this one, and then the one on the left, and the one in the center. So if we just take a quick look at these tile samplers, they're a little bit different because we're changing this so that it's only going to tile once on the Y opposed to twice. And it's the same for this one, I believe. Oh wait, this one's double, because this one actually has 2 patterns. That's fine. I don't believe anything else is different. I think it's exactly the same as the other one. It's just got to make sure you set up those patterns to be like that. So with that being said, we can now move on to the second pattern. Now remember to just create another blend node at the end and then attach your second pattern to this section here. Yeah, so if we come all the way back here, we can just sort of see what we're going to create first. I'm going to start with the panel 2, layer 2 here. We're going to start with grabbing our shape that we created back here. We're just going to reuse this because it's very similar to this shape here. So if we take a look at here, I've just grabbed, essentially duplicated a blend node, and then I'm just blending these 2 together, and that will give me the same shapes we had before. And that's just an add linear dodge, and that's set to 1. Next we want to grab another blend node, and we want to get rid of those sort of marking bits here. And I've just got a shape, and I've just put a square down, and then we'll set the scale at 0.5, and I was like, that's about right. So then we can push it through a transform 2D, move it into position, and then blend it in with an add linear dodge again. Now we don't want these grey bits here. We'll fix that sort of down here. So then we just go transform 2D. That's just to move it up into position again. There's quite a bit of that happening. And then we go another shape, and we just want to block out that lower part of this sort of square bit here. So we blend those 2 together. That's just for max lighten, and then we're using a histogram scan to crunch those values to give us just a solid panel. Now that we have our solid panel, we want to create a blend node here, and just plug this into the background. We're going to create a shape which is a normal square again, and then we want to blend our grey colour, which is created back here. We're going to reuse the same grey colour so it's consistent through the whole material. Blend it into the foreground of this with a multiply, and then move that one into position and crunch it down based on how it's looking in your out view here. So then we want to mirror it on the X, and that will give us two sides, and then blend it with a subtraction, so we're cutting away at this sort of white section, and it will blend those two together for us. Next, we want to push this one through a transform 2D. That's just to sort of scale it down because I didn't have a gap or anything at the bottom and it wasn't quite looking right to me. Now I've got a gradient map just to get rid of those black areas and give me a more solid color back. Next, we want to create a blend node, and it's another subtraction. And then you want to plug this output into the background, and we'll start working on what goes into the foreground up here. So foreground's made up of this sort of square here. Just go another square. We want to blend that to a blend node, and with a multiply, and with this sort of uniform color, which is a darker gray. And then we're just moving that one into position, and again the mirror grayscale, and then finally a max lighten. Then we can finally plug it into this one, and once it's plugged into this one, we can do our subtraction, and you'll see that now we get this sort of second indentation into the panel. Next, we're moving the blend along the line. We're going to be adding this sort of lower line section here. So that one's just going to be a min darken this time. We'll go from left to right. It's just another square, except the scale is now on 0.41, and then the size is on 1.6, and on the Y it's on 0.2. Then we're just doing an edge detect, and that's going to give us our lines. And then we've got a transform 2D just to move it to position, and then you just plug it into a blend node and put it on a multiply, ready for this other shape here. So we grab another square, we're going to scale it down to 0.41, and then a size 0.74, and then on the Y a 0.2. So once that's sort of done, we can then do another edge detect, and again transform it to the side, and then we can blend those two together. Now we're getting this sort of shape here. Except we are missing this big square bit here, so we then need to work on that. So I'm actually also using a mask for this one. That's just to get rid of any tiling sections, so it's only going to be here because I am using transform 2D, and yeah, we don't want it to sort of if we move this across here, then you'll notice there's a little bit intruding over here, which we don't want. So that's what that mask's there for. If we go up here, we can sort of see how to create this sort of indentation area. It's just a normal square, and then we want to put the scale onto 0.5 and size on 2.02, and on the Y 0.04. And then we're inverting that to give us the sort of black square that will go in. And then we have another shape, which is like a mini square, and that's just sort of 0.5 again. And the scale is just adjusted to 0.17, and then the Y 0.07. And then we're inverting that one again, like so. And we have two transform 2D nodes going down here. Then we want to blend those two together, and that will give us this sort of T shape here. And then once that's sort of sorted, we can then blend our the cutout section with our line section. So that's just going to be a min darken again, and that should be in the right position as long as you've moved it to the right spot in the transform 2D. If it's not quite right, just adjust it a little bit and you should be fine. And then we're blending it in with sort of lighter grey, which is the same grey from up here again. We didn't want to go too crazy with it. And then I am doing another transform 2D just for any more adjustments. And then finally we can plug it into our min darken section, and now we have these lines sorted. Next up, we are going to be doing the sort of vents that are in this section, and then we'll be using these vents twice for both this bit and the lower bit here. So this bit should be pretty handy to have. If we come down here, we'll see that I have just a normal shape square again. Then when the scale's at 1, and on the X it is on 1, and on the Y 0.01. And then we'll go transform 2D, just adjusting its size a little bit. And then we'll go a little blend node, add linear dodge. We'll just add in a bit of a bevel with our uniform, non-uniform blur. And it's pretty much the same as before, except this time I've just lowered it a little bit to make it a little bit harder. And then we've just got a gradient map just for control sakes. Then we're going to be using our good friend, the FX map again, except this one's going to be slightly different. If we just plug our gradient map into the image input here, and we want to use another uniform color just to give us that nice black background, and now we can just jump straight into this FX map. So I've just put the iterations to 100, and then we have a quadrant map here of the branch offset. Now, what's different about this one is I've just changed this sort of value here, and that's going to adjust how it's going to sort of tile. I wanted the sort of lines to be very fine, so that's why it's on this very specific number, but it's exactly the same as the last one. We're just changing the value a little bit. Next we have another transform 2D. I'm just moving it a little bit to position, and then we're inverting that grayscale, and that'll give us this sort of thing here. Once that's sorted, we can then plug it into our foreground, and now we should have our lines. Now if you want bigger lines and stuff, you can adjust the gap in the FX map and so forth. Next we go another transform 2D. Again, that's just to bring back some of these sort of panel edges here, because I actually lost those when I added the grey color over everything. So we want to bring that back a little bit. Then we go to a blend node, and that's just on a multiplier, and it's on a opacity of 1. And then we have something in the foreground here and something in the opacity. So we're using a mask, so let's cover the mask first. We have a shape that's just on a square, and the scale's at 0.41, and the size at 1, and then on the Y 0.23. And then we're going to transform 2D, just stretch it out a bit. You could just increase the width of this, but either way is fine. I was probably going to have a transform 2D in there anyway, just for subtle tweaks. But that should give you your mask, so that this blend node will only ever mask, like, it will only add details inside of that mask. So next we want to do the second vent, which is this one here, which is pretty much the same as the last one. So we're just using the same shapes. I think I just grabbed this whole section and duplicated it down, except this time I am not beveling with a non-uniform blur. We're just going to leave it like so. So we have another FX map here. It's a slightly different sort of look to it, because I wanted a bigger sort of gap and maintain these sort of shapes here. If we go to a transform 2D next, and we're moving it all the way down here, I think I crush it a little bit as well. Yeah, just very slightly bringing down the side a little bit. I wasn't quite too happy with it, so I just squished it a little bit. Then we're inverting the grayscale, and now we can push it into our panel. And now we have two vents. Now we can move on to making these panels at the top here, top and bottom. So these are just made up of two squares. So we just create a square here, and it's the size of 0.85 on the X and 0.04 on the Y. And we blend that one in with the same mid-tone grey that we used with all the other panels on layer 2. This one's just the same, it's just, I think it's 0.1 smaller, it's giving me a bit more space at the bottom. And again, we're blending it with that grey, and we move that one into position. Once those two panels are in their correct spots, we can then blend them together with a max lighten, and then we have two panels. Then we can grab another blend node, and then it's another max lighten, and we blend our main panel into the background and this one on top. Finally, we need to put this little black line that separates the two, and that's just made with another square with a size of 0.002, so very small. And then we move it to position with transform 2D, and then once it's in position, we can subtract it from our main pattern. Next up, we have to create these smaller sort of squares here. I'm not going to go over these because it's exactly the same as everything else. You just got to get the size right and then move it to position. Doobity doop. Then we have this compartment thing. So this is the compartment that sort of looks like it's sort of sticking out sort of thing. So this one's a bit different. So we'll start with the main shape of the compartment, which is this sort of square thing, and that's just going to be a scale of 0.85 on the X and 0.04 on the Y, and then we're just moving that to position, so it's around the bottom there. And then once that's in position, we can create a blend node, put it on the multiply, and we want to start creating this sort of slope that sort of rises up. So that's just done with a gradient linear on default settings, and then we create a gradient map from that and sort of control it a bit more with that gradient map. So I've gone for a black color, and then it goes into white, and then it goes into grey, and then it goes into white again, and that's all scrunched to the left there. Once that's sorted, we can multiply those together, and then we histogram it just to control it a little more, give you a little harsher edge, and then we can create a blend node and push that into the background and put it on min, darken, ready for this next part, which is going to be this sort of side detail that makes it look like it's actually modeled into the mesh. So I'm doing that with a gradient and a disk. So the gradient size is just on 0.03 and 0.04. We move that down to the position down the bottom there, the same position as that one. So with the disk, we've got a gradient linear, and then we're pushing it through another gradient map, and we're just moving up the whites, and then we just use a little bit of a curve to sort of sharpen it up a little bit, and it will be really hard to see, but when we multiply it with a lighten, you'll just sort of see this sort of circular shape that's sort of indented in there, and we want that sort of thing there. So we transform 2D it into the right position, so it's slightly more to the right because we want it on the corners, and then we mirror it and we invert its grayscale so that it's doing the opposite, and then we blend those two together as a min darken, and then we get this sort of triangle shape happening inside of our mesh, and that will give you that compartment look. Then we want to invert the grayscale because we want it to go inwards and not outwards. We transform 2D it so it has one at the top and one at the bottom. We blend the one at the bottom first with a multiply, and then we can blend the one at the top afterwards with another multiply, and then that's the compartment done. And actually that's the whole pattern done there for that one. So with that done, that's panel 2, and then we just have to do panel 3 and then do the tile setup, and that's the material pretty much sorted. But that's it for this part, and we'll do the rest of it in the next part, so please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.